The telegram arrived on a Tuesday, which Mira Alderton would later think was a terrible day for your life to change. She had been standing at the kitchen window of her aunt's house in Pemberton, watching the rain come down in sheets across the valley, when she heard the knock. Her aunt was out. Mira answered the door herself, and the boy who handed her the envelope looked embarrassed to be there, the way people look when they know they're delivering something bad. She read it standing in the doorway with the rain blowing sideways onto her shoes. Edmund was dead. Her fiancé of 8 months, the man she had agreed to marry, not because she loved him the way she had once imagined loving someone, but because he was steady, and the world had not been steady for a long time. Dead of a fever 3 days ago. Buried already. The telegram was from his brother, one sentence of fact and nothing more. She stood there long enough that her left shoe soaked through. Then she went inside and sat down at the kitchen table and thought about the fact that she had traded her train ticket twice already. Had given up the teaching position in Halifax she'd been offered because Edmund had asked her to come to him in Saskatchewan instead. Had written her mother a letter explaining that she understood now, finally, what it meant to choose a practical life over a romantic one. She had been 26 and she had felt very mature about it. Now she was 26 and she had nothing, no fiancé, no position, no place that was hers. Her aunt's house had never been hers. She had been careful never to confuse welcome with belonging. She did not cry. She noted that about herself the way you note something strange in another person, with a kind of distant curiosity. She had expected to cry. Instead, she made tea and drank it, and thought about the fact that she had already sent ahead 3 boxes of her belongings to Edmund's address in a town called Larkhaven, outside of Swift Current. She had thought of everything except the possibility that he would not be there when she arrived. She was going anyway. She did not entirely know why. The boxes were there. She had nowhere else to go that did not require explanation. And something in her, stubborn, silent, the part of her that had always refused to be a problem for other people, decided that she would go and retrieve her things herself, and then she would figure out the rest. The train ride was 31 hours. She spent most of it watching the prairie open up around her, flat and enormous and gray in the March light, and thinking about nothing in particular, which was its own kind of grief. Larkhaven was smaller than she had pictured. She had pictured something modest. It was smaller than that. A grain elevator, a hardware store, a post office, a church, a hotel with 3 rooms, a cafe that appeared to also be a barber shop. The train station was a platform, and a man in a coat who took her trunk without being asked and put it beside the building, and then went back inside without saying anything. She had Edmund's address. She found a woman outside the post office who told her that Edmund Ferris had rented a room from Hattie Boone on the east side of town, and that his things had already been cleared out by his cousin from Moose Jaw, and that she was sorry for her loss, and that she said it with the comfortable efficiency of someone who has delivered this kind of news before. And the boxes, Mira said. He would have received 3 boxes in the last week. The woman did not know about any boxes. She went to Hattie Boone's house. Hattie Boone was a large woman with kind eyes who smelled like cinnamon and was very sorry about Edmund but had no boxes. She had let the cousin take everything. The cousin's name was Arnold, and he had gone back to Moose Jaw. "I don't know an Arnold," Mira said, mostly to herself. "No," said Hattie. He said Edmund didn't talk much about family. That should have been a warning, Mira thought. That Edmund didn't talk much about family. She had thought it was grief. He'd lost his parents young. She had not thought to ask more. She stood on Hattie Boone's porch in the cold and calculated. Her boxes were in Moose Jaw with a man she'd never heard of. She had enough money to get herself back to Pemberton, but not enough to stay in a hotel more than 2 nights, while she figured out what to do. She had written to no one because she had not known what to say. She was standing in a town she didn't know, having come for a life that no longer existed, and the wind coming off the fields was the kind of cold that got into your collar and stayed. "Is there anyone in town who might know where my boxes ended up?" she asked. "Anyone who knew Edmund well?" Hattie thought about this. "Fletcher Dane knew him some," she said carefully. "They worked together a season, but he's not an easy man to talk to. Where does he live?" Hattie looked at her the way people look at you when they're deciding whether to discourage you. Then she gave directions to a property 3 miles east of town. She borrowed a horse from Hattie Boone's neighbor, who wanted to know if she knew how to ride. She said yes. This was mostly true. The farmstead sat in a shallow valley out of the wind, and it looked like someone had built it in a hurry and then spent years making it solid. The house was plain, unpainted, but the roof was straight, and the barn beside it was well kept in the way that told you the person inside cared more about what was useful than what looked good. There was a truck parked beside the house and smoke coming from the chimney, and a dog, some kind of healer, blue-gray and watchful, that came to the fence and assessed her without barking. She tied the horse to the fence post and knocked. The man who opened the door was not what she had expected, although she couldn't have said what she had expected. He was tall and lean in the way that comes from outdoor work rather than intention, with dark hair that needed cutting and a jaw that had not been shaved in several days. He was holding a mug of something hot, and he looked at her the way people look when they weren't expecting company and haven't decided yet if they want any. "Mr. Dane," she said. "Who's asking?" "Mira Alderton. I was engaged to Edmund Ferris. I've been told you might know what happened to 3 boxes of my belongings that were sent to his address." He looked at her for a moment without speaking. The dog had come around to sit at his feet. "You came from out east," he said. "Pemberton. Yes, he never mentioned you. It was not delivered as cruelty. It was just a fact, stated plainly, and it landed in her chest anyway, like something dropped from a height." "That seems to have been a pattern," she said. He looked at her a moment longer. Then he stepped back from the door. Not quite an invitation, but not a refusal. "I don't know about boxes," he said, "but the cousin took a truck full of things 3 days after Edmund died. I saw him do it. I would have stopped him if I'd known there was someone else to consider. Were you there when he died?" "I was the one who found him." She didn't know what to do with that. She stood in his doorway and tried to think clearly and found that she couldn't quite. Her feet were cold from the ride over. "I'd offer you coffee," he said, "but I only have tea." She almost laughed. It came out strangely, not quite a laugh, more like the sound before one. "Tea is fine," she said. He made tea with the brisk economy of a man who has lived alone long enough to have systems. His kitchen was clean in the functional way. No decoration, no softness, but nothing dirty, nothing neglected. He put the mug in front of her and sat across the table and looked at her like a man trying to solve something. "He talked about getting married," Fletcher Dane said. "I didn't know the details. I didn't ask. We corresponded for 5 months. We met once, when he came east to visit family." She paused. "At least, he said it was family." Fletcher Dane said nothing to this, but something shifted in his expression. Not pity. Something more careful than pity. "I gave up a teaching position," she said, not to him exactly but aloud, because saying it made it real, and it needed to be real before she could figure out what to do about it. "I came here because I'd already packed my life into 3 boxes and sent it ahead of me. And it seemed more sensible to come get the boxes than to sit in Pemberton explaining to everyone how wrong I'd been about my own future." He looked at her. "That's a long way to come for 3 boxes. I know. What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." He picked up his mug, put it down again. He seemed like a man who chose his words carefully, not because he was evasive, but because he'd learned that words had weight and he didn't like to throw them around. "Hattie has a room," he said, "for 2 nights. I've already accounted for that. There's a school in town without a teacher," he said. "The woman before left in January. They haven't replaced her." She looked at him. "Are you suggesting I apply for the position I already gave up?" "I'm saying there's a position. I don't know what you should do with that information." She drank her tea. He let her think without filling the silence which she noticed, and appreciated more than she expected to. "I need to find my boxes first," she said. "I know Arnold's address," he said. "In Moose Jaw." "I can write it down. You'd do that. You asked about your boxes. I know where they went." Writing down an address isn't much. She studied him across the table. He didn't look away, and he didn't seem uncomfortable being studied. He just looked back at her with the same steady attention he'd been giving her since she knocked, like a man who has learned to pay close attention to the things in front of him, because inattention is how you get hurt. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," he said. Arnold might not give them back without a fight. She stayed in Hattie Boone's room that night and wrote a letter to Arnold in Moose Jaw, and another to her aunt in Pemberton. She told her aunt only that she had arrived safely and was sorting out a situation. She did not tell her what situation. Her aunt would have opinions, and Mira did not have the energy for opinions. She also thought about Fletcher Dane. He was not what you would call warm. But there was something else there. Something she kept turning over in her mind, the way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath. He had not said a single unnecessary thing. He had not looked at her with the practiced sympathy that people put on like a coat when they don't know what else to offer. He had looked at her like she was a person who needed practical help, and then he had tried to give it. She was not accustomed to being treated that way. Edmund had been attentive in the way of a man who wanted to be liked. He complimented her often and remembered small things, but she had noticed, in the 5 months of letters, that he never asked questions that required honest answers. Fletcher Dane had asked what she was going to do with an expression that suggested he actually wanted to know. She applied for the teaching position the next morning. The town council met in the back of the hardware store, and there were 4 of them, 3 men and a woman named Bev Carlton, who seemed to be the one who actually made decisions. They asked her about her training, her experience, her plans for the curriculum. She answered everything directly. Bev Carlton looked at her for a long moment at the end and said, "The room at the schoolhouse needs work. You'd be responsible for the stove." "I can manage a stove," Mira said. "You'd start Monday," Bev said. 2 weeks trial before anything is official." She said yes. She wired Arnold in Moose Jaw about the boxes. He wired back that he'd return them for the cost of transport, which she could not currently afford. She wired back that she would make arrangements. She did not know what arrangements yet. She was building the bridge while crossing it, which was not her preferred method, but was the only one currently available. Fletcher Dane came by the school on Thursday with a load of firewood in the back of his truck, which he stacked without being asked beside the schoolhouse door. She came out of the building to watch him work and said, "I didn't ask you to do that. School needs wood," he said, not pausing. "I had extra. You should let me pay you for it. You just started a job." He set down the last piece. "Pay me in the spring." She crossed her arms. "You don't know me." He straightened up and looked at her. "You came 300 miles for your own belongings," he said. "And when you found out you'd been misled by a dead man you couldn't even be angry at, you applied for a job the next morning. I think I know enough." She did not know what to say to that. She was not used to being understood quickly. She was used to being understood slowly, over time, after she had explained herself repeatedly, and even then imperfectly. "Thank you for the wood," she said. He picked up his jacket from the truck bed. "The stovepipe needs checking," he said. "The woman before you had trouble with it drawing right. I can look at it Saturday if you want. You don't have to do that." "I know I don't." She looked at him for a moment. "Saturday," she said. The boxes arrived from Moose Jaw 2 weeks later, paid for by Fletcher Dane, which she discovered only after the fact when she went to pay the freight office, and was told it had been settled. She drove out to his farm in the school's borrowed cart, which took longer than it should have, because she took a wrong turn and arrived at his property in the early evening with the light going gold across the fields, and the healer meeting her at the gate like they were old friends. He was on the porch when she pulled up, and he watched her get down from the cart without offering to help, which she appreciated because she didn't need help, and he seemed to understand that without being told. "You paid for my boxes," she said. "I did. That wasn't your responsibility." "No," he agreed. "I'll pay you back. I know you will." She stood at the bottom of his porch steps and looked up at him. The evening light made him look less guarded than usual, or perhaps she was just getting better at reading him. "Why?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. A real moment of consideration, not the performance of it. "Because you came out here, for a life that someone else failed to deliver," he said. "And I didn't want your things to be one more thing that didn't come back to you." She stood there, with the sound of the wind moving through the grass around her, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness, exactly. Something more like recognition. The feeling of being seen accurately, without flattery, without embellishment. She had not cried on the platform when she read the telegram. She did not cry now. But something in her chest that had been closed very tightly since Tuesday loosened just slightly. "I made too much stew," he said. "If you want to stay for supper." She tied the cart horse to the fence post. March became April. She taught 12 children ranging from 6 to 14 in a single room with a stovepipe that did draw better after Fletcher Dane fixed it. She learned the town's rhythms. Who spoke at the post office and who nodded, which families were having a hard year, and which children came to school hungry, what Bev Carlton meant when she said, "We'll see about that." She meant no, and what she meant when she said, "I suppose it could work," she meant yes. She learned Fletcher Dane's rhythms too, more slowly, the way you learn the layout of a room by living in it, rather than by being shown around. He came by the school once a week without announcement, always with some practical reason. A hinge that needed fixing, a look at the roof before the spring melt, firewood. He never stayed long. He asked questions about her work with the same direct attention he gave everything, and she'd answer them honestly, which was easy with him in a way it had not been easy with Edmund, where every conversation had felt faintly like an audition. She noticed things about him in pieces, the way you notice a place you're beginning to know. He was a man who had lost things. She gathered this not from anything he said directly, but from the shape of how he lived, careful, contained, nothing wasted. There had been a wife, she learned from Bev Carleton at the end of April. She'd died 4 years ago, in the second winter after they married. He had not remarried. People in town had stopped suggesting it. She did not ask him about it. She waited to see if he would tell her himself. He did, eventually. On an evening in early May, when she had stayed late at the school marking papers, and he had come by to check on a loose board in the porch, and found her still there, and she'd made tea on the school stove, and they had sat on the front steps in the cooling evening. Her name was Judith, he said, without preamble, like she'd asked a question he'd been deciding whether to answer. She got sick the winter of '29. There wasn't much anyone could do by the time we knew how sick. "I'm sorry," Mira said. "I know." They sat quietly for a while. The kind of quiet that doesn't need filling. I think," Mira said carefully, "that being sorry for someone and pitying them aren't the same thing." He turned to look at her. "I'm sorry because something was taken from you that should have had more time," she said. "That's different from feeling sorry for you." "I don't feel sorry for you." He looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said. "I didn't think you did." Her 2-week trial at the school became a proper contract in April. She wrote to her aunt that she was staying in Larkhaven for the foreseeable future, and her aunt wrote back 3 pages about the inadvisability of this, and Mira read it twice, and put it in the box under her bed, where she kept things she wasn't ready to throw away, but wasn't going to act on. She was building something here. She could feel it the way you feel a house you're living in, not the dramatic arrival of belonging, but its quieter accumulation. The particular creak of the 3rd floorboard, the angle of morning light, the sound of children's voices, the dog at the fence, the man who did not say unnecessary things and meant every one he said. She was afraid, sometimes, in the evenings, not of anything specific, of wanting something again after she'd been so careful not to, of the gap between what she thought she was going to and what actually arrived. Edmund had seemed steady and had not been. The world was full of things that seemed like one thing and were another, and she had been wrong before in ways that cost her. But there was a difference between Edmund's steadiness, which she now understood had been performance, and Fletcher Dane's, which she could see was structural, built into the way he kept his farm, kept his word, kept his silences. He was not trying to be anything. He was just what he was, and what he was had proven consistent in every observable way. She was still afraid. She had just started to think that fear and trust could exist in the same place. He kissed her in June, not dramatically. They had been standing at the gate of his property after an evening where she had stayed for supper, and they had sat on the porch after and talked about nothing in particular. His plans for the East Field, a book she was teaching the older children, whether the summer would be drier than last year. She had been there too long. She'd said she should get back. He'd walked her to the gate, which he always did, and then he'd stopped and looked at her in the way he had of looking at things, fully, without evasion, and said her name. Just that. Just Mira, in a tone she had not heard from him before, something that was not his usual plainness, something with an edge that felt like question and statement at once. She looked back at him. He kissed her the way a careful man finally does something he's been thinking about for a long time, not tentatively, but not rushed either, like someone who has decided to mean it. She kissed him back. The summer light was still in the sky at 9 o'clock, which was one of the things she had come to love about this country, the way it held on to the light. When they pulled back, she looked at him and said, "I want you to tell me if this is something, or if it's convenience, or loneliness, or proximity. I need you to be honest with me about what it is." He didn't break her gaze. "I've been alone 4 years," he said. "Lonely isn't a reason. I know the difference. Then what is it?" "I think you know what it is," he said, "but I'll say it if you need to hear it. I need to hear it." "I love you," he said. "I've been trying to figure out how to say it without scaring you off since approximately March," she breathed out. Something she'd been holding let go. "I've been scared," she said. "I know. I'm still a little scared. I know that too." She looked at him in the long evening light and thought about the telegram on a Tuesday, and the wrong train she hadn't taken, and the boxes she'd come to retrieve and what she'd found when she got here. She thought about the ways a life could fall apart, and the ways, if you were paying attention, it could rearrange itself into something you hadn't known you were heading toward. "I love you too," she said. "I have for a while. I didn't want to say it before I was sure I wasn't confusing it with gratitude." "Are you sure now?" "Yes," she said. "I'm sure." He reached out and tucked a piece of hair back from her face with the same deliberate care he gave everything, and she leaned into his hand the way she hadn't let herself lean into anything in a long time. She stayed in Larkhaven. The boxes she had sent ahead from Pemberton lived in the small house she rented on the edge of town, and then, the following spring, they moved into Fletcher Dane's house, where they fit without effort into the spaces that had been empty. She taught for 3 years in that single room with the repaired stovepipe. She learned the prairie in all its moods, the blue cold of January, the violent beauty of a June thunderstorm, the way August heat made the grain fields shimmer like water. She stopped bracing for the moment it would fall apart. There is a particular kind of courage, she understood eventually, that has nothing to do with not being afraid. It is the courage to walk towards something you cannot guarantee, because the life that comes from refusing to walk toward things is no life at all. She had been trying to choose safety over love when she agreed to marry Edmund, and it had not even given her safety. You could not buy peace of mind with your heart and come away with both. What she had with Fletcher Dane was not without difficulty. There were hard winters and hard seasons, and the way two people's silences sometimes press against each other wrong, and have to be worked through with patience. There were things she had to learn to say out loud that she had always before swallowed. Things she had to trust him with before she knew. For certain he would hold them carefully. He always did. She thought sometimes about the woman who had stood in a doorway in Pemberton with a soaked shoe, reading a telegram in the rain and not crying. She did not feel sorry for that woman. She felt something more like tenderness. That woman had been wrong about the shape of her future in the best possible way. Not because anything easy had come, but because something true had. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.